Now, every political crisis is also a political opportunity. So obviously there's a lot of defeatism and fear around, but also this is going to open up possibilities for the left. Now, obviously, the victory of the far right in the first round of the elections is extremely bad news. And we don't know what will happen next week. It's not impossible that we get a far right prime minister, even though it's not the most probable outcome. So you can feel plenty of defeatism around, as we say in French, where we don't know what kind of gravy we're going to be eaten with. That's what people are saying this week. But at the same time as defeatism, there's a lot of enthusiasm. There has been more anti-fascist activity in the last 3 weeks than there has been in the last 3 years. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Macron was hoping that a snap election would prevent the left from uniting and allow him to win out as the only obstacle to fascism. But the left did unite, forming the new Popular Front, which I'll come to in a moment, and did a lot better than Macron and his gang. 33 million people voted, 16 million stayed at home. 10.5 million voted for the Rassemblement National, National Rally, and their close allies. 9 million for the radical left, New Popular Front. 6.5 million for Macron and his close allies. And 360,000 for revolutionary left candidates standing against the New Popular Front. So how come the far right did so well? Well, I'm going to leave some of the causes to Kate and come back on the causes later. I want to look at what is the approach now. The situation is complicated and sometimes difficult to explain because you also do need to understand something about how French elections work. But to get a decent analysis, you have to ask the right questions. And the most important question, in my opinion, is not how many disagreements do Marxists have with this or that political force or leader? For example, the France Insoumise, the radical left reformists, and Mélenchon, their leader. The correct answer instead is 37, if anybody's wondering. What we have to do is, the correct question, in my view, is how useful are different forces and different events for working class interests? So that's where we need to start with, the working class interests. So who are the players? Well, the traditional parties of the left and right tending to collapse after they've been discredited by pushing through neoliberal attacks against mass resistance. Macron, who began 8 years ago saying he wanted to be Francis Thatcher, but he keeps reinventing himself, and this year he's reinvented himself as the only thing stopping France from falling into right-wing or left-wing extremism. Another player, a very successful Rassemblement National, which has normalized itself. Only 41% of the population now think that the National Rally is a threat to democracy. However, this organization, which came first in the elections in the first round, has not built a solid party structure in most towns. The left campaign in the elections involved 100 times more leaflets, 100 times more posters, 100 times more meetings, demonstrations, and so on than Le Pen can manage. Le Pen has never managed, in the last 10 years, has never managed to have more than 5,000 people on a street demonstration. So that's a good sign, if you like. I mean, they can't have a lot of power, but we mustn't. We must be precise about what it is. And the other big player is the France Insoumise, the France in Revolt. Radical left reformist movement, not exactly a party, which has built itself up and stabilized itself, maintaining an insurgent style and winning massive support among the working class, and especially among the in the multi-ethnic working class suburbs. I was there the other day. I took an Uber to get there because I was late, and the black Uber driver said to me, "Oh, we like Mélenchon around here. He fights for us." And that's just what you hear like all the time around there. And the final player is Macronism, who seems to be collapsing too. His reputation ruined by his killer cops, the violent repression of the Yellow Vest movement, the retirement reform he pushed through, and so on. So in this situation, what is useful to the working class, either immediately or in the longer term? The first thing I think is important to say is that indubitably the New Left Alliance, the New Popular Front, has been extremely useful to the working class. Because of the two-round system in French elections, if there had been no left alliance, there was definitely a far-right National Rally government next year. It's maths. That is to say that if you have several left candidates in each town in the first round, there's an extra chance that the second round will only be between the right and the far right. So by the four main left parties agreeing not to stand against each other, and also to put together a minimum program, they took dozens of MPs away from the far right. This is very important because you get a few people opposing election campaigns and real anti-fascist campaigns in the streets. Absolute nonsense. First of all, if you go to the young people's demonstrations in the street, they're all chanting "Siamo tutti antifascisti," and they're all chanting "Front Populaire." This idea that there's two different, completely false. In fact, the fact of left unity, the pretty radical program I can come to in a moment, have developed an enthusiasm which has really pushed anti-fascist activity forward. For the first time, the major trade unions have called for a vote for the left against the National Front. My trade union, University Lecturers Union, incredibly sleepy trade union, getting emails, who can leaflet the railway stations in the towns where the national rally has a lot of support. I will come to more of that in a moment. So it was indispensable to support this alliance, and in particular because the alliance was agreed in a couple of days, many compromises were made. The alliance was impossible otherwise. So the program of the New Popular Front does not mention nuclear energy. This does not mean that the Greens, who signed it, have dropped their opposition to nuclear energy. It's just that that's what an alliance is like. That's what a joint program is like. Similarly, the program does not mention leaving NATO. France Insoumise is in favor of leaving NATO, but that doesn't mean that we have abandoned our opposition to NATO. This was not all fun. Making an alliance with the Socialist Party is not all fun. However, it has a certain amount of historical background to it. The worst right-wing Blairite equivalent in 1930s Germany found himself in the camps just alongside the Trotskyists and the Jews. And that's the reason that we can unite with quite right-wing socialists against the fascists, is that there actually really are a common enemy. And so with the New Popular Front, the parties agreed which towns were for whom, and then each party chose their own candidates. And that means we have a New Popular Front candidate who is François Hollande, the ex-president, social liberal who pushed through horrible laws when he was president, and he's now one of the candidates for the New Popular Front. But that's life. If you're going to sign an agreement with the Socialist Party, you can't say we will offer you agreement as long as we get a veto on your candidates. It's just completely impossible. So that means that the New Popular Front remains fragile. It might not last a month, but it was absolutely essential to reduce the number of members of parliament from the far right. And one of the reasons that you cannot separate the anti-fascist movement in general and the electoral campaign is it's impossible to say to people, come and join our real anti-fascist movement on the streets. Incidentally, we don't care if the National Rally have the Prime Minister or not. It's just absolutely impossible. If the worst happens and that next week we have a fascist prime minister, even if they don't have a majority in parliament, they have loads of power to name top civil servants and so on. And in the short term, stopping that happen was extremely important. So that's the first thing I think which was very good for the working class. The second thing is that the tremendously broad anti-fascist activity going on this last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, has been tremendously important. There were hundreds of demonstrations called by trade unions, dozens called by young people's organizations, more dozens called by women's rights organizations. We've had appeals by rock musicians, by rappers against the FN, 2,500 scientists put out an appeal, 84 social science magazines, the footballers and the cyclists of the Tour de France, of the Avignon Theatre Festival, various charities, Attack and Greenpeace, and the anti-Zionist Jewish organizations. Even one of my friends is a classical musician, and he said, classical musicians are the most apolitical people you can imagine. But I tried to pass around a petition, and we got 800 classical musicians signing an anti-fascist appeal. Now, all of this is tremendously important. Even the things which are really not all that, not all that sexy and aggressive, like classical musicians signing an appeal. They're all very important because we've got to have mass involvement in the campaign, because mass involvement, when people have a sister or a nephew or a workmate or their favorite classical musician in the movement, then they are much better placed to resist the tremendous barrage of propaganda which is coming out of the television at the moment. So what else in the present situation has been useful to the working class? Well, I mean, in my opinion, and it's a good one, the actual radical left movement, La France Insoumise, has played a very positive role. They have brought determined opposition to Islamophobia into the mainstream of the French left. In fact, this radical reformist group is ahead of the far left in France on this issue now. For the first time, the word Islamophobia is in the New Popular Front program. Now, of course, in most countries, this would be obvious for the last 40 years, but France has not been like that. And at the big meeting last weekend in Montpellier, Jean-Luc Mélenchon got up and he said, notice that Islamophobia is written in that at last. So he made it a big deal. Yeah, it's not just something they did because they were under pressure. For the last year, the France Insoumise have put opposition to the genocide in Gaza at the front of their election campaign and political activity. 2 members of parliament were suspended from parliament for waving Palestinian flags. And this group has elected into parliament a whole series of people who became known by leading various social struggles. I mean, I just think of a few that I noted down 4 or 5. There are 300 candidates. My local candidate is an emergency doctor who became known as a whistleblower when she wrote a book denouncing working conditions in the hospitals. Just down the road there, sorry, it's in Lyon, there is, what's his name? Raphael Arnaud, one of the leaders of the Young Guard, a dynamic anti-fascist organization which was founded a couple of years ago. He's very controversial in the press at the moment because apparently he was once arrested for allegedly thumping a fascist. Sébastien Delogu, a taxi driver who led the campaign against the Uberization of the profession, and of course Rachel Keke, who became well known as a hotel cleaner and the leader of a 22-month-long strike of the cleaners. And finally, just again, this time just down the road, Ali Douada, very active as a town councillor in the working class suburbs of Paris, very much involved in the campaign against the genocide in Gaza. The FI is managing to bring into parliament a whole load of people coming from the struggles. Now, do I have disagreements with the France Insoumise? Of course, it's a reformist organization. However, the reason that they're under attack at the moment as anti-Semitic and just like the campaign you saw against Corbyn, at the moment the France Insoumise and the leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon are under attack. But the reason they're under attack is that Mélenchon represents an open-ended radical break with the present society. Probably, in my opinion, more so than Corbyn, because Corbyn had a list of radical reforms, whereas Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the organisation are putting forward, let's have a new constituent assembly and change the constitution so that the president has far less power. Let's move to 100% organic farming, 100% renewable energy, and a long list of very radical ideas. And the whole atmosphere is an insurgent atmosphere of we need to rethink the whole of society. Now, they say, the leaders of the France Insoumise say that they're in favor of a citizens' revolution. Now, of course, we are Marxists, so we come along and say, oh, excuse me, I think you should be talking about the workers' revolution. And we're not wrong from one point of view. On the other hand, 55% of the working class does not make a distinction between citizens' revolution and the workers' revolution. So I think that these are the people that we need to be worked with. In the last week, 50,000 people contacted FI and 20,000 got involved in activities. We have mass door-to-door work in the housing estates, and it has to be said that door-to-door canvassing is not habitual in French election campaigns. So those are the useful and good things going on in France. What's going to happen next week? We don't know. Then the most probable is no majority. And there's a number of nasty things that Macron could do by searching enough clauses of the Constitution. But in any case, we will definitely need a very powerful left-wing movement and a Marxist voice inside it, which is very often lacking, it has to be said.